Alright, my playlist for the videos I animated for Bicloff is now finished, and can be found in the description below. That should let people know what I've been busy with for the last 7 months! Aw man, I'll never be able to justify a Patreon at this rate. Oh well, I better get started. What should I do next? Making an animac for a segment of Legally Blonde the Musical? Maybe later. Animate Jello Apocalypse's take on Cucumber Quest. Oh man, that was years ago. Make an editing splice of the 2 intros to DuckTales? Probably too short. Ooh, a spiritual examination of the movie Coco. That might be fun.
Here's the thing about logic. It's completely objective. There's no my logic or your logic. There's just logic.
Ooh, this one looks really fun. Oh wait, it's gonna be another video on atheism. What good could possibly come of that?
So that if you're an atheist, maybe you'll become a little more libertarian. And if you're libertarian, maybe you'll come a little closer to atheism.
Okay, let's do this. The thing that really infuriates me about people like Killian is that in a way I greatly appreciate what he's doing. As someone with more libertarian leanings, I find the arguments from the anarcho-capitalist perspective very intriguing, and as a Calvinist, I welcome the rather systematic use of first principles. But then you listen to the explanations and then you realize that Shane is a slave to the overly simplistic nature of militant atheism, insisting on the correct view of reality and redefining language to one's own esoteric notions. But for now, let me tackle the primary issue I take with Killian, specifically from 2 of his videos which will be linked below. Killian argues that all logical arguments stem from first principles.
First principles are foundational propositions and axioms that do not have to be defended.
And since he has established that atheism is simply a lack of belief in God, which makes theism an active philosophy, he then argues,
the burden of proof is on the active side, not the passive side. The burden of proof is never on the passive side, which means that the burden of proof must be on the active side when the active side conflicts with the passive side.
Shane, here's something you might not have considered. As a Christian, the existence of God, or for the sake of this argument, the belief in God, is my first principle. It is the foundational assumption by which I examine and understand all of reality. And by your own definition of what first principles are, I don't need to fulfill the burden of proof. I understand that you believe that the laws of logic are the first principles of reality, but really they are the tools by which you coherently connect your different principles together. You can't just start off with the law of non-contradiction, because in order to make the point that
something cannot be A and not A at the same time,
you need to have an A to bring into examination, or rather a first principle to bring into examination. For example, I think you would agree with me that the first principle of libertarianism would be the non-aggression principle. However, if you also hold to the idea that you are part of a nation-state and that you need an enforced border to protect it, you might also believe that taxation is needed to fund that enforcement. But since taxation by its very nature is a clear violation of the non-aggression principle, you are now holding to a logical contradiction and must make a choice. You need to either adjust your notion of a national border, or you need to adjust your first principle. This is actually part of how I transitioned from being a purist libertarian to being a nationalist. And just to add, I did this while having Christ as my first principle. You see, Killian, if you're going to create a philosophy, then your first principle needs to grant something with intrinsic value. And more importantly, you need that something to be far more interconnected and encompassing than just aggression and lack of belief. Which brings me to a point of annoyance that I brought up in one of my first videos. Saying that atheism is about a lack of belief in God is like saying Christianity is about a lack of belief in atheism. It's technically true, it just doesn't mean anything. People are defined by what they do believe in, not what they don't believe in. And when you state what you do believe in, you need definitions and terms that actually relate to people who don't think exactly the same way you do.
But on the whole, since all atheism is a rejection of the God hypothesis, the burden of proof is on the theists.
For crying out loud, I reject the God hypothesis. Why? It's a dismissive concept invented by naturalists, it fails to correspond to any existing notion of God, much less the Christian God, and it's primarily
used to denigrate us by people who have no desire to even understand where we're coming from.
This insistence on holding to a passive negative philosophy makes you arrogant and condescending, especially when every response to your collection of straw men is,
Doesn't matter! The burden of proof is on you.
If I said something to the effect of, oh, well, until you hold to a positive philosophy that fulfills the burden of proof, I don't have to listen to a word you have to say, would you take me seriously? Although, it would be a good method to illustrate your intellectual hypocrisy. But you know where the burden of proof really doesn't matter? The voting booth. And for someone who's pushing for a view that requires a change in political organization and perception, I'm rather amazed that you don't realize how foolish you are being. Granted, these videos are 3 and 5 years old, but I don't really see a change in your attitude from then to today. You don't order believers in big government to prove themselves to you, you do what Milton Friedman did, and point out to them that there is a better way, but with a more obnoxious voice. Don't give me that look. As a final note, let me just say that I find it adorable that you are using dictionary.com to define the prefix of A in atheism, while the very same site has definitions for atheism and theism that contradict your lack of belief assertions. Now, I understand why you do this. After all, the definition of feminism doesn't have a practical correspondence with how feminists are today. However, I'd like to propose a more radical theory. What if in the same way those women aren't really feminists, you are not really an atheist? Think about it. What if in fact you are a theist, but you haven't yet taken the time to articulate the God you worship? It's kinda like what the Apostle Paul said to the people of Athens. I see that in every way you are very religious. I even found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship, and this is what I'm going to proclaim to you. Of course, I realize this might be asking a bit much for you, after all.
When you put a lot of money into something, or time, or emotional investment, it can be very difficult to admit when you're wrong.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Don't forget to like or dislike this video, add it to your favorites or share it if you really liked it, leave a comment below, feel free to follow me on Twitter, Gab, and AskFM, and don't forget to subscribe to see future videos. Until then, take care and Godspeed.